am Jett and I am here to talk about bowl projections for college football after week 2 of play. And this was kind of an interesting week because going into week 1 in the preseason, you don't really know what anybody looks like. And then that's usually when most of the upsets happen, and we have to adjust what we think of each team. And so week 2, the hard part is sometimes you have like a contradiction of an outcome for teams. So a team that looked good, like Notre Dame in week 1, looked awful in a 28.5 point upset against Northern Illinois in week 2. So it's still hard to adjust what we think about a team. And so I'm kind of going off of my projections as a forecast into the future of what I think a team will be. So for the number 1 overall team and the number 1 overall seed, I have Georgia. They look phenomenal. They looked great in the second half, especially against Clemson in week 1. They scored 28 points against Clemson on that defense in a half, which is very impressive. And then we didn't really get to see him against Tennessee Tech do anything, but you could just see the full-out athleticism in all 22 positions on offense and defense. It's phenomenal. And I know a lot of people for the number 2 overall team have Texas after they went into Ann Arbor and beat them in the Big House 31-12. I, for now, have Ohio State just based off of talent, and they haven't really played anybody yet, so I feel like once they have to play somebody big, they'll lock in, and we'll see Jeremiah Smith continue to do what he's been doing when he gets to, playing Penn State, Oregon, Michigan. And the thing that's crazy is they have 2 potential All-American running backs in Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. It'll be very interesting to see them use both because so far they've kind of got to pick and choose when they use them. It'll be interesting when they have Henderson start out a game and then have Judkins fill in later on, because in my opinion Judkins is the better running back, but right now he's the 2 back for them. So where it becomes a little different is the 3 seed. I have the 11th ranked Miami Hurricanes, and the only reason I have them the 3 seed is because the top 4 buys, the top 4 seeds, go to conference champions. And so the impressive thing about Miami is all of the preseason hype they get every year turns out into like a 6-6 or 7-5 season. Well, this year it doesn't look that way, and I'm just getting around to it because I always thought, yeah, it's just a bunch of talk with Miami in the off season. They have to prove to me that they can do it, and they did it very quickly. Week 1 in the Swamp against Florida, 41-17. Cam Ward looked like a Heisman candidate. Damian Martinez in the backfield, transfer from Oregon State, also looks dynamic. But the player I kind of want to emphasize here, I've got a couple stats, is Xavier Restrepo. He's a 4-year player at Miami. And so last night I did some research on the quarterbacks that he had. So his freshman year was N'Kosi Perry and De'Aaron King. N'Kosi Perry had a really good first couple years in Miami, but his junior year he struggled. And so after his junior year, he transferred to Florida Atlantic to play one last year in college. And De'Aaron King was better at Houston when he took Houston in 2015 to the Peach Bowl and beat Florida State. Restrepo's sophomore year, he had De'Aaron King and Tyler Van Dyke as quarterback. Van Dyke never came to fruition while he was at Miami. We'll see how he does at Wisconsin, but Restrepo's junior year, he had Tyler Van Dyke and Emory Williams when Emory Williams went out with a gruesome arm injury last year. He's back as the backup. And for this year, hopefully Restrepo only needs to use one quarterback in Ward. So going through the list of names. Restrepo has played with 5 quarterbacks. That's pretty crazy, especially since last year with kind of a mesh of a couple different quarterbacks. He still was first team All ACC and decided to come back and stay at Miami. So that says a lot about him and his character. So I always thought he was a very interesting player to spotlight, and I hope he has a great year and has success in the NFL based off of what he's had to go through at Miami. The 4 seed, I have the 12th ranked Utah Utes. Same situation as Miami in the ACC, is I think Utah will come out on top in the Big 12. The Big 12 was kind of interesting this past week. I'm not high on Kansas State being a real threat to win the Big 12 because their receiving core is a bunch of first-year starters, some incoming freshmen. So I think they need a year under their belt. Avery Johnson is a very talented quarterback, but people have to remember he's still a sophomore. So I don't have him in the Heisman race, but I think he needs 1 year as starter under his belt. So it's just a really young team, so I think this is a season too early. I think my favorite in the Big 12 is Oklahoma State. Now, I dropped him out of the Big 12 title or champion spot in the 4 seed just because they gave up 648 total yards against Arkansas at home on Saturday. Props to them for winning that game, but in any other situation where you give up 648 total yards, you lose. And Arkansas right now is probably in the middle of the pack of the SEC. So that just, to me, I dropped Oklahoma State in my rankings, and Utah so far has been pretty consistent, returning Cam Rising and Brant Keithy with Micah Bernard in the backfield. They have so much returning talent. Now looking ahead to the future, all these Big 12 teams are senior laden. They crazy 23, 24-year-olds, guys who won't be returning next year. So that's when I think Kansas State will take over. But for this year, I would say look out for Utah, Oklahoma State, and a dark horse I would have is Iowa State. Now, once we get further down, it gets at-large spots outside of the 12th seed, which I'll get to later. So the 5th seed is the 3rd-ranked Texas Longhorns, like I brought up earlier. Quinn Ewers is my favorite for Heisman right now. And in the offseason, they kind of look like what Georgia looked like when Alabama was dominant, where they're getting the transfers they want, and Silas Bolden and Matthew Golden, just guys who are the best at power conference programs that didn't come to fruition with their team, so they hopped in the transfer portal. And Texas is loaded with talent. So I have them as the 5. 6, I have Oregon right now. I know people are probably wondering, after barely beating Idaho and Boise, I think once they get a game or an opponent that they can get up for, and it's just easy, like Ohio State going into Eugene, I think we'll really see Dylan Gabriel shine. And I mean, if you look at the first game, Dylan Gabriel was 41 for 49 with 380 passing yards. They just couldn't get it in the end zone. So I'm not too worried about Dylan Gabriel. And that team is stacked. So I feel like once the first 3 or 4 games under their belt, once they're out of non-conference, we'll start to see the Ducks rolling in the Big Ten.